So when you say like the word is appearing to people in the Old Testament, the question that comes to mind is, okay, so when John starts his gospel with the word became flesh and dwelt among us, is that a reference to that Old Testament word that we see present as like Christ in the Old Testament? Or is that a reference to something else? Like what would you say to that?
Yeah, so here's the way I like to think about this. So let's imagine that we're friends. We're living the first century. We're Jews, and we're friends with John. And we walk in one day, and John has this blank sheet of parchment in front of him, and we say to him, "What are you doing? Looks like you're going to write something." He's like, "Yeah, I think I'm gonna write down everything that I know and have experienced about Jesus. I'm gonna write a gospel." We're like, "Oh, that's a great idea. How are you going to start? How are you going to begin?" And he says something like, "Well, I want to do something different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke did. I want to get right to the heart of who Jesus is." And in this imaginary conversation we're having with him, we might say, well, then, I mean, there's various options that you might have. For instance, John could have, and maybe we would suggest this to him, he could have begun by saying, in the beginning was wisdom, and that wisdom was with God, and that wisdom was God. Or he could have started out, in the beginning was the messenger of the Lord, and that messenger of the Lord was with God, and that messenger was God. Or he could have begun, in the beginning was glory, and that glory was with God, and that glory was God. So there's a variety of different ways that John could have begun his gospel. Of course, he narrowed in on the word, in Greek, the logos. Now, the reason that John did that is because I don't think it's because of kind of the Greco-Roman world and the philosophical talk about the logos. I think that John is directly reflecting Old Testament text, where you have in Hebrew, the devar, which is the Hebrew word for word, the devar Yahweh, the word of the Lord, who is appearing to people. Now, when we hear the word, of course, we're thinking ears, not eyes. Words are something you hear. Unless it's printed, it's not something that you see. But there are these various stories in the Old Testament where the word of the Lord makes himself a visual word, such as the occasions that I talked about. And I would argue that actually helps to explain a lot of what we hear later in the prophets when we see the word of the Lord came to Isaiah, or the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, or the word of the Lord came to any of the prophets. In the past, I thought of that as, the prophet hears this word coming down from heaven and he writes whatever he hears. And I'm not saying that's not possible, but I suspect a lot of times what's happening here is the Son of the Father is appearing to prophets and he's talking to them. This is the word coming to prophets, speaking to them, just like he did any number of times from Genesis onward.